I'm Ashley Guzman, and this is the Disaster Empire podcast, where we talk to thought leaders and innovators in resilience. And we have got another panel back for you this time. Really excited to be here and share with you our guests. So I'm going to let them tell you a little bit each about themselves, and then we're going to jump into a great discussion. And Mona, I'm going to start with you. Can you give us just a brief overview of your background?
Sure, Ashley, and thank you for having me on your podcast. I worked for 28 years with the city of LA, and I worked in a couple different departments, the last one being the Los Angeles Police Department. After I retired from that, I did a small stint with FEMA, so I did get to work on the national level. I moved to Hawaii, where I work as a consultant. When I say work, I really mean volunteer. And I'm working to build a resiliency project there that's going to be great for that side of the island of Oahu, because over on that side, there's really no resilience at all. So once that project is completed, that side will have a great resource. So I'm still very active. I'm actually speaking in Australia in July on emergency preparedness in America, and highlighting some things that happened in Hawaii last year. So that'll be interesting. But so I've had a pretty good long career in emergency management.
And you're keeping going. So thank you so much for being here today. It's great to have you on the panel. And I'm going to jump next to Kelly. Kelly McKinney, can you share a little bit about your background for those who don't know you?
Thank you, Ashley. And I'm also grateful to be included with this distinguished group. I come from city government as well, but my city is New York City. And I worked in city government for a lot of years first with the New York City Health Department, and then OEM, which is now called New York City Emergency Management. I left there in 2013. I joined the American Red Cross in Greater New York, where I was the chief disaster officer. And then about 8 years ago, I came here to NYU Langone headquartered in Kips Bay, Manhattan, East 34th Street and First Avenue. And I've been here through thick and thin, basically. So it's, but still a working emergency manager, still on call. 24/7. Although I have a great team, so I'm actually second call. I'm not first call this week. That's super important. But
yep. All right. And Steve, last but not least.
Hey, hello everybody. A couple points of order. Everybody that you see on this episode has also appeared on 5 Minutes to Chaos, my podcast, either together or as part of a panel discussion. So I want to thank you all for being here. And Ashley, I want to thank you for inviting me to be part of this auspicious group. I am a career emergency manager, and as I mentioned, podcast host. My career starts in 1980 as a ground-pounding EMT with New York City Emergency Medical Service. Shortly thereafter, became a paramedic, climbed the ranks to deputy chief, joined special operations, ran citywide major incident response. So I say, because of that, I've been in emergency management since 1985. New York City Office of Emergency Management. I was a charter member, or as they say, a plank holder of the agency when the mayor created it in 1996. Did state emergency management. And my most recent real job was as an emergency manager for a major electric and water utility in Colorado. Currently running a consulting group called Kuhr Group, crisis management, and really spending a lot of effort putting out good podcast content.
Excellent. So honored to have you all here as we're talking about emergency management and resilience. And so let's dive right into it. So Mona, I want to get started with you. Would you be able to share a story in terms of how emergency management professionals, how crucial their role is in disaster response, and really the impact that it has on communities?
Well, let me see. Of all the phases, preparedness, I think, is the most public-facing phase outside of response, which, happens when there's a disaster or something happens. Preparedness, on the other hand, can be done, ahead during blue skies. All the seriousness isn't there, but the importance is. Some communities are really thirsty for preparedness, and of course, some, really struggle. Throughout my career, I think I found it most rewarding in that space, meeting people in communities and working with them when they really want it. I've had the opportunity to be involved with a few different community projects. For example, in 2014, I worked to create with a consulting company, Constant and Associates, I remember, to create the 5 steps to neighborhood preparedness. And some communities are using that still throughout the nation. There was also Map Your Neighborhood, so they were kind of competing projects at that time. Who knows? I don't know. Maybe there's some other ones out there now. But, just being able to work with the community face to face is such a rewarding thing rather than sitting behind a desk. I was thinking this morning, what was my favorite part about being an emergency manager? And I can't say it was grant writing or plan writing. It was always the public facing part, the part that made it fun when you got to witness communities really coming together and becoming resilient, just like what I'm doing now in Hawaii with the communities of the Kolaloa district on the North Shore side, the windward side, really coming together and creating their resiliency. It's so rewarding. It really is. I don't know.
Thank you for that. Definitely. Kelly, is there anything that you'd want to add to that?
Well, the issue of emergency management and its effect on communities, I think, is really central to what we do, because we are in service to communities, right? I mean, it is what we do that determines or should determine or improve outcomes for communities when they're in crisis. And that's a very daunting prospect for an emergency manager, because we have this term in the business we call ownership, like who's accountable. And to be accountable for disasters it's kind of scary when you think about it. And people who get into the business, especially new people, it's kind of exciting and it's interesting, and then you get sort of thrust into this big disaster, and you feel that ownership, right? You feel that the outcomes rely on your actions in that moment, and those actions aren't really super clear to you at that time. That can be very scary, and I think in some cases it pushes people away because they're like, I don't want this, right? I didn't sign up for this. But that's why courage is a big thing. That's why really steeling people. In other words, it's encouraging them to build that resilience so that they can act effectively in the moment to the benefit of those people, that those individuals who might be trapped there in their homes, or the seniors or the individuals with access and functional needs. So it's a lot, and I think that the challenges are just getting greater and greater, with each sort of passing year, right? It's just that we're getting more and more into this sort of polycrisis world.
Absolutely. I'd love to hear about that excitement that you've gotten from really working in your communities and strengthening that, and really what is some of the roughest of times, right? The preparedness piece being, we hope that something won't happen, but I think we all know that things do. So to really be there, and as you said, to see the communities come together is so rewarding. Steve, what would you add to that?
I think the impact that a well-oiled emergency management operation has is profound to a community. Only emergency management can bring together the disparate resources needed to help people in their greatest time of need, in their worst possible day. And that means your emergency management leader and his or her team need to spend every waking moment preparing for gray skies. And by the way, I'm glad we're using blue sky, gray sky, because I don't like left and right of bang and boom. I just think that that term doesn't really apply to us. So I believe our job is to be at the tippy point of the spear for a gray sky event. And we should know the resources. We should know who to call. They should know us. We should understand the situation by having intelligence. And nobody does it like a real emergency management team.
Thank you for that. Now, I would like to jump into a little deeper into what you were talking about in terms of community engagement. Do you have any examples that you could share with the audience of where you've really seen that happen well and the reasons for it? So the real community taking that ownership or really getting that buy-in.
You know, I got to tell you, I find the American public to be a bit of a challenge when it comes to community self-preparedness. I think the best that I've experienced was with regard to wildfires when I was an emergency manager for utility in Colorado. The communities that live in the what we like to call the WUI, or the wildland urban interface, clearly understand their risk, especially in the city I worked and lived in. Of course, we had a catastrophic wildfire, a series of them actually, but one in 2012, Waldo Canyon fire, that destroyed 350 homes, 2 deaths, and destroyed pretty much the whole west side of the city. So that's the best I've seen, but I believe the American public is overwhelmed with life. Children, getting kids to soccer, bills, taking care of the shopping, and emergency preparedness is just somebody else's job. Because if I dial 911, a big red truck always comes until it doesn't. Because it's a gray sky event, and it's game day. So I don't have a real answer to this, because I've been struggling this for my whole career. I've been struggling with how we engage the public to be more self-reliant. CERT teams, I'm not quite sure that that's done that. CERT teams have a role. I'd be interested to see where, we go with public preparedness over the coming months with what's supposed to be a pretty robust hurricane season.
Is there anything that you'd add to that with the work that you're doing right now, say in Hawaii, and any other of your experiences?
I have found pockets of extremely active communities, and those communities are usually driven by 1 or 2 really active community members. And then when those community members move on, that dynamic changes. But they're out there. And again, some are really thirsty for it, like the one I'm working with in Hawaii right now. And then there's you've heard of food deserts where you can't get good fresh food. It's like a resiliency desert. They're just communities that they're not resilient at all, and they're not working towards it because there are different competing priorities. Sometimes when you're struggling and you're living day to day, it's very hard to plan and think outside of, that thing that's important to you, which is surviving. But on the flip side, there are other communities that are active. The ones that are not, they're always going to have a major percentage of the population that's always going to need help. They're just not going to be able to really take care of themselves after a big disaster. Mm-hmm. And so you try to focus on those communities that are motivated and interested, because then you can kind of move them off your plate a little bit, because they can take care of themselves a little bit more, because you've got to really go over and look at this area. So yes, they're out there, but they have to be cultivated, and they're cyclical too.
Those are all great points. And I definitely speak to those challenges, right? That some communities are pulling together, or they have a strong leader, right, that helps guide that, and others just don't. And I'm sure quite a few folks are trying to dig into that. But Kelly, is there anything that you would add, anything that you've seen in your time that's been particularly effective?
I mean, I've got good experience, or I've had good experiences with the Red Cross, obviously, because, it's a volunteer-led organization. And, and through the many crises that the Red Cross has been through in Greater New York, we've seen these community members step up and do, heroic things. I mean, I think of Long Island in particular, the volunteer cadre there really took ownership of the sheltering operation during Hurricane Sandy. And, they did it. They did it for themselves. They did it for their communities. And I mean, it really works. But, for me, I think it has to do with sort of mindset. And, I think a lot of people in our business, a lot of emergency managers, they have this blue sky mindset. They work and they plan and they train and they exercise in blue sky. And when, the real value that we add, the real, game time for us is in gray sky. Game time is when, Ashley, you and I were talking about it. We both work for big corporations. I mean, the CEO of this organization could care less about me or my team in blue sky, but in gray sky, I get called up to the conference room, and then the boss is like, "Well, what are we doing?" It's game time. So, but yet most of us, most emergency managers spend their time as if, and their assumptions and their thinking around blue sky, when we need to put ourselves into gray sky. We need to live there. We need to exist there day in and day out. And our assumptions have to work in gray sky. So gray sky, when you talk about a community, it's back to what Mona said. I mean, every community is so diverse, but it has so many different types of people. There will always be in a community those people that naturally will step up and take a leadership role on behalf of those communities. I mean, they're always there, right? And the question is, how do you engage them in gray sky? How do you give them what they need to take that role on and be effective? And it includes information, right? It includes an ability to convene their communities, and it may include resources, right? But that connecting to the right people in those communities is key. But yet we sit here in blue sky and try to figure out how it's going to work. It's because those people in gray sky, they're not out there, engaging with you because they're busy. They're busy doing that leadership thing wherever else they do it. They're doing, because they don't just do it in gray sky. They do it they do it with their families. They do it with their organizations where they work. So it's not like they're like, oh, well, let me go take this disaster thing on. But yet, in the disaster, you can find them. So it's really about putting yourself in the job and starting there, not starting back here in blue sky.
I think that's a great point. And you hit on something else that I wanted to talk to all of you about, and your experience in the emergency management field, or what you're seeing in terms of trends. On the corporate or the private side, we're talking a lot about technology, about the threats there, whether it's cyber, it's other IT, systems going down. And a really big topic of discussion right now is AI, right? And how that is going to transform the work we do. Do all of you have thoughts on that in terms of emergency management and disaster response, how that can either benefit or is, some of the things that you've already might have been seeing happening in the field right now that's changed the way that you do your work today? And
For
Kelly,
me,
do you want to? Oh, go ahead, Steve.
For me, the biggest advancement, and this may seem basic because it's been around for a while, but it's proven, is GIS. I go back to a time, as I mentioned, my time in emergency management goes back decades, and where we had paper maps. And we managed major incidents. Now, wars have been won using paper maps. If anybody has been to the Churchill Command Center in London, you'll know that there were dozens of maps on the walls with so many pinholes you could barely make out the topography. But I go back to a time where we had, for example, slosh maps, sea, land, overland search for hurricane, Army Corps of Engineering maps for New York City that showed evacuation zones, and that was it. We had these huge books, and we would develop hurricane plans and evacuation strategies based on those maps. Today's GIS systems are actually an incident management tool, not just a preparedness tool. So for me, GIS is one of the big advancements. I think AI is not mature enough yet to talk about how it will affect emergency management, although I'm sure we could all come up with some ideas.
Thanks for that. Kelly, Mona, any thoughts on that in terms of IT and technology and how that's benefiting or changing how we'll do our work in the future?
You want to go ahead? I have a couple thoughts, but
Well, I was thinking about a couple different things came to mind. The use of drones. I love the situational awareness that we get from those, really easy access bird's eye views of that. Starlink came on, and being able to provide internet service to jurisdictions when they're completely down, that kind of stuff is priceless. AI, I've tried to use Chat GPT a little bit just for fun, putting in questions about emergency management, and it spits you out some stuff, and you really have to review it, just like I'm sure every other topic. But I think at some point, it's going to be relevant enough so that, I don't know, maybe communities can use it in, making their own community plans.
Absolutely. Kelly, how about you?
Well, we think a lot about it, and because I'm in healthcare, so we are hyper connected technology wise, and it's fortunate from my office because we have all of these great examples to sort of emulate, right? And they're the things that these clinicians do with technology, just blows your mind. So we're sort of racing to catch up, and we know that we have to engage it, because otherwise, it's going to overwhelm us and overtake us, and we're going to find ourselves like 10 steps behind. But ultimately, it comes down to data, right? And, what is AI? AI is just, somebody told me once, it's just, it's just a brain that never forgets. It never forgets. So if you put a data point into AI, it'll never forget that data point. That's what machine learning is all about. It learns and it never forgets. So there's a theory that if you give something enough information, it not only knows everything there is to know about that, it knows everything that will ever be known about that thing. So it can predict the future, right? It's sort of scary in that way. And that's why healthcare is so, AI people are falling over themselves to get the data that healthcare has been collecting for so many years, because it has profound effects on human life and what we can predict about people, what we can predict about disease and lifespans. It's the future is just, it's sort of mind blowing. But when you think about emergency management, right? And I say this a lot, and I'm going to get in trouble for it one day, but we're terrible at data. I mean, we're terrible at data. And, my group, fortunately, we've got these smart people, and we're starting to, the last 6 or 7 years, we started to collect a lot of data. And the things we can do with our data is astonishing. So I think as a business, we need to start collectively, all of us, collecting consistent data, because ultimately, if we had enough data as a profession, we can change the way we work. We can predict the future. We can change outcomes because AI is going to allow us to do that. But we're not focused enough on that. Everybody's collecting data, and it's all different data, and it's all dirty, bad data. We need leadership, a leadership voice on that, on the data thing, so that we start to, because that data it's raw materials, it's value, it's gold, right? But here we are working day in and day out, and we're not collecting consistent data that's going to really change the way we work.
I think Mona and Kelly, you both made really great points, and I think with data, it's an incredibly powerful tool, and so is AI. But it's only as good as the prompts, right? The questions that you ask it, and that's what we have to become proficient in. And we, as you said, Mona, we still are at a point where you definitely have to review it right, and analyze it. And you have to have the knowledge base to consider what you're looking at and if it's accurate or not, because a lot of what's coming out of it is not accurate at this point. We are training it and teaching it, as you're saying. And I think the other piece, Kelly, is with data, it's garbage in, garbage out. Again, we need those sources of truth need to be really solid as well to get that data. And I'm not going to spend much more time on this, but I've been spending a lot of time this year on data and really looking at it from a risk mitigation standpoint and having many years of data now to look at in terms of incidents and what does that teach us. But there's always, I would say, you have to pause there too, because you have to think of where you were, so many years ago with that data and what you were trying to gather versus what you might want to gather today too. So really exciting time. And I agree, Kelly, a lot. We're all going to be connected in. It's not going away. But I wanted to get into something with all of you that I think is important, with emergency services, with emergency management. Really, I see the role as coordinating, right? When there is an event in the community, or Kelly, in your role, coordinating, from the hospital and the healthcare side, when an incident occurs. And to me, the partnerships that we build are so meaningful. So could you share really some examples or some of your own thoughts around building that coordination, building that connectedness? Because I think, the police force in the United States is about 200 years old, and emergency management as a profession is much younger, and crisis management in the corporate side is even younger. So a lot of that professionalism, say, as a strict discipline, I would say is not there. But to me, it's all built on, right, those procedures or those methodologies that people have brought in with them from law enforcement or the military or administration or working in their communities, right, and really understanding the communities. So I don't know who wanted to take that first, but I don't know, Mona or Steve, if you want to jump in and then we can see if any others have thoughts as well.
I could take a crack, Mona, if you'd like.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
I think collaboration, I know collaboration is at the core of crisis management. And I preach a method of crisis management called Rolodex management. And that may date me and Kelly.
It does just a little, Steve.
Just a little, but I speak about it a lot. And that applies today to the digital contact directory in your cell phone, which works even better than a Rolodex, because there was a time when I was a citywide emergency manager and I had 5 Rolodexes in a bag with business cards stapled to it. Today I can tag a contact. So if I want to talk to that guy that runs emergency management at that hospital in Midtown, what's his name? NYU McKinney, and it comes right up. So I have a set of Kuhrisms or aphorisms, if you will. One of them is that everybody has a seat at the table. So when I go gray sky on game day, I want everybody at the table, whether they're there physically or available to me virtually or with me in spirit, because I know I can reach back to them. But part of the blue sky responsibility of an emergency manager is networking, and that's reaching out, to the parties that will have some application to your emergency when you are in the moment, when you are in your command center or emergency operations center and things are going down and you just need assistance, you just need human support, you need intelligence at the table, or you need something so unusual that you just need to know where to make the ask, and that's picking up the phone, thumbing through your Rolodex or your contact directory and making that contact. So for me, it's about networking and building those relationships. And that takes effort. That's reaching out, that's walking the halls, doing drop-bys with coffee, literally doing drop-bys with coffee and showing up at people's offices and making those calls. Hey, I'm the new emergency manager. I want to, come over and meet you. And I have some experience with that. When I landed in Colorado, I was a dark horse candidate for this role 10 years ago. And but I learned it in New York because we had 44 city agencies and about another 50 some odd state and federal agencies we had to work with. And the director at the time taught us how to walk those halls.
Thanks, Steve. Mona, what advice would you give?
Well, I think Steve touched on it a little bit, but I guess we could just use the term whole community. That's planning with everyone, right? There were times, I'm sure Kelly and Steve remember, when we all did function in silos. And how great was that? It wasn't great at all.
It was counterintuitive.
So, yeah, it was right. Speaking of that, I remember the old EOC in the city of LA, which was 4 levels under the ground under City Hall. It was an old bunker, bomb bunker. It had these big steel doors, but the layout was like little tiny cubicles that had these big things that you know everyone sat in their own little cubicle, and nobody really talked to each other in that old EOC environment. Can you imagine all these people, you know, converging on this one place to coordinate something, but then they get there and they all sit in these little things and nobody talks to each other. So then they threw that out. Now the new model is open space, you know, like the big tech companies, you know, everybody can see each other, you're facing each other, you're in pods or whatnot. So that's, you know, it's conducive to being able to collaborate with each other. And if you don't have that skill, you know, you're just really kind of in the wrong field, because you need to be able to work with other people. And if you haven't trained together, responding is not impossible, but it's definitely harder. If you don't know, you know, finding that battle rhythm is going to take longer. It would be clunkier. But if you know each other ahead of time, and of course, emergency managers should have the power to convene. I mean, coordinate. That's really the function of the job, right?
Yeah. Kelly, what would you add to that?
Well, you know, it's funny. Mona's talking about the City of LA EOC, and we're talking about, you know, this issue of building those relationships. And the thing that actually the convergence of those two, in my mind, is Jim Featherstone. I mean, you know, the great Jim Featherstone. I mean, he was actually the fire chief in LA, but he also was the director of EMD for many years. And he's the guy, I think, Mona, the guy that built the new EMC or the new EOC across the street. Was he not?
Well, he came in during that time, the funding we got after 9/11. And so it was in the works, but he was instrumental in, you know, really getting it up and running. That's for certain.
He is, and he's, you know, he's still doing great things. But he, in my mind, he was and is a master of building those relationships, because he's just an amazing individual and human being. But the one thing I wanted to say, and this is because it's the thing that's sort of in my mind. I went on vacation a couple of weeks ago, and my wife's like, "You're not bringing any work with you," so I brought this book, and it's called Lessons from the COVID War. I don't know if you've seen it, but it was written by it's called the COVID Response Group, and it was a guy, Philip Zelikow, who was the chair of the 9/11 Commission. He convened 34, huge experts in the field, including Mike Osterholm from, the great epidemiologist, and Melissa Harvey. And anyway, so they wrote this book, and it's about the national COVID response. And listen, I mean, if an emergency manager has one book that they have to read in this country, it's that book, because it just describes what happened, right? What happened. And ultimately, it boils down to, and this is what Zelikow says. He says, it wasn't politics, it wasn't resources, it wasn't science. He says it was a crisis of competence. He said it was about knowing what you had to do and getting ready to make it happen. And so I read this book on vacation, and it was a mistake because I was totally immersed in it. And every page and every mistake, I'm like, that's an emergency management issue. That could have been fixed with coordination. That's emergency management. I'm not talking about part of it. I'm talking about from A to Z, it was emergency management. So here we are in the aftermath of that, and nobody's talking about that. Nobody's talking about how we fixed that, because, there's another one coming, or there's the earthquake, or there's the what's worse? I mean, look what happened in. Did you see what happened in Houston yesterday with that derecho that came through, straight line winds, 111 miles an hour? I mean, one day everything's fine, the next day, all the windows in your downtown buildings are blown out. Like, that's the world we live in. This is all emergency management, and it just, to me, we got to go back. We got to go back to the COVID. Nobody wants to go back to COVID. They're all sick of it. We're sick and tired of it. Nobody wants to hear about it. Every time you talk about it, the eyes start rolling. But I think we got to go back there. And, because to me, it's, the last thing I'll say is that, they a lot of sessions I get into, they start out and they're like, let's break into groups and let's write the definition of emergency management. What is emergency management? And everybody writes it up there. And then we have this thing and we have this mission statement. But for me, the best definition is, there's a guy, Peter Drucker, who's like the guru of management. And he said management is about enabling effectiveness. Enabling effectiveness. And to me, that's the essence of emergency management. In a crisis, we are there to enable effectiveness, to make things happen and take effective action, period. And if we can do that, lots and lots of the details that we talk about get better. And if we can't, nothing ever gets better. It only gets worse.
So I love that, Kelly, idea of looking backwards and learning from the past, which I think, Steve, to go back to an earlier comment about, particularly about the U.S., we're not so great at doing that. Something I think, and we'll make sure to thank you for the book recommendation. We'll make sure to link to that in the show notes. Great. Because it sounds fabulous. And, I think, at least from my experience, is people have not wanted to really have closure on COVID. So really do that true debrief. Some pockets better than other, but as a country, we really didn't. We just tried to move on, which, there's positives and negatives in our culture around that. But I do want to look forward. So as we're wrapping up today, I want to start with you, Mona. What are some of the things that you might tell others out there in emergency management and crisis management looking at resilience? What would you recommend are the trends or what they should be looking to build going forward?
I think I just saw on the news this morning or yesterday that we've had so many days in a row of tornadoes across the country. Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking, wow, disasters are just becoming so frequent. Having to figure out how to adjust to this frequency. I think people really have to pay attention to that. Maybe there'll be less downtime, less planning time, less preparedness time, and just really more response time. So if you can get ahead of it, looking forward, coming up with ways that communities recover quicker, having those ideas in mind, what communities could look like, what they should look like. I mean, who wants to plan? It's like planning for your death. Nobody wants to plan their own funeral, but I'm not saying that we're planning a funeral. I'm saying planning, for the future when something happens to your community. What should it look like? Can you get ahead of it in some way? Yeah.
Those are great thoughts. Steve, anything that you would want to add to that?
I think from a gray sky perspective, we're coming into some rough waters, figuratively and not. Political violence, civil unrest, hurricane season, severe weather and tornado season. I think if any emergency manager that doesn't see this, then they're just not seeing the social unrest and the social implications of what's going on. And any emergency manager that thinks that that's a law enforcement responsibility, they're partially right. But when you have a city in a situation where multiple universities or I go back to the Occupy Wall Street, where parts of almost entire Lower Manhattan were under siege. That's an emergency management responsibility, not from the enforcement or the public safety perspective per se, but there's everything else that law enforcement does not communicate, or rather coordinate, that has to be done. transportation, public information, mass messaging, coordinating with outside entities, bringing in the support for law enforcement. These events become violent, getting in the medical resources and stuff like that. So that's just a bit of a kind of a gut feeling where I think we're heading right now. We're going to have a controversial presidential election that can stir up some of the muck, and I think we need to just make sure that we got our eye on those particular gray sky balls.
Steve, I think those are great points. And certainly many of us are thinking particularly around the election, not only in the U.S., but around the world this year, because there's quite a few going on, but definitely something in emergency managers. Mona, you made a good point about natural disasters and the frequency and the cost of that in lives and also just in terms of dollars, but also Steve making a great point about the people side of it, if you will, or the man-made disasters, however you want to phrase that, other things that are happening in our cities and really across our countries that can also impact and that are becoming part of the jurisdiction of emergency managers because of the impact that they can have on their communities. Kelly, what are you thinking about there? And again, thank you for the book recommendation. I'll definitely have to check that out, and I think others of our listeners will as well. Any final thoughts in terms of emergency management and where things are headed and what you would recommend?
Craig Fugate used to say, after the disaster, you're going to be in trouble. You're either going to be in front of Congress talking about why you didn't do more, or you're going to be in front of Congress talking about why you did too much. So you're going to be in trouble for doing too much or for doing too little. So he said, you might as well do too much. And to me, that's sort of my that's the way I approach my work, is that I'm going to be fierce in advocating for what I do because it's about the people that I serve. The community. If community suffering is increased because we're not effective, that's unacceptable, right? We cannot be meek and shy away from hard decisions. We cannot shy away from asking people for what we need and telling people what we need and making that ask for resources or for their help or for whatever. We put them on the spot. They have to say no to it. They have to answer in the aftermath for saying no. We can't be meek in asking for bandwidth for our own teams, for talking about why our teams need to be bigger and what those teams need those people for. And because the more emergency management bandwidth you have, the more you're going to be able to do. And that's a synergistic, multiplicative equation, right? Emergency managers make disasters 10 times better or 100 times better in terms of outcomes than they would otherwise be. So we're just this little spark, but there's the benefits of us are so great, but we're just very bad at communicating that to the people who have the budgets, right? And so I would just say, be fierce and, advocate for what you do. And because when things go wrong, you're the one who gets, you're the one that gets dragged in front of that, that committee asking why it didn't go better. And so now's the time to really, build up that capability and put those people on your team and make them own the job with you.
Thank you. I think that's very well said. And I want to thank all of our panelists for being with us today. To the audience, you really got a treat in hearing some of the best minds in the industry, and really appreciate your time. And thank you for being here. Thank you, Mona, Kelly, Steve. Really appreciate it. Take care.